Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says his security cabinet will not meet to approve an agreement for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the release of dozens of hostages until Hamas backs down from an attempt to, quote, extort last-minute concessions. Netanyahu's office accuses Hamas of reneging on parts of the agreement. After months of negotiations, Israel and Hamas did agree, at least in principle, to a ceasefire deal. The ceasefire should lead to the release of dozens of hostages held by Hamas, as well as hundreds of Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. That prospect has been welcomed by Palestinians and Israelis alike.
Celebrations in the streets of Gaza after the news of the ceasefire agreement was announced.
It's an incredible feeling. Thank God we are safe, and thank God we will return to our home, my children and I. May God have mercy on the martyrs and grant patience to their families. It's a very overwhelming and beautiful feeling.
But for many, the joy of possibly seeing an end to the violence is dampened by the hardships they've endured during the war.
I feel so happy, but at the same time a deep sadness weighs on me. We are returning to our homes, but we've lost grandchildren, fathers, brothers, cousins, neighbours, and our homes. What can we say? We thank God for everything.
We've endured this war for more than a year, and the circumstances have been extremely difficult. We've lost many of our loved ones and family members. Personally, I lost my father, and I pray to God to accept him as a martyr.
In Israel, the families of hostages being held by Hamas, who've been protesting for the release over months in Tel Aviv, are reacting with cautious optimism.
I'm happy it's happened. It's too late, but finally it's happened. Let's hope. We say you count the money and the stairs, and now it's only talking. We want to see it happen. I think many people want to see it happen. And if you ask me, it should happen a long time ago.
Despite the promise of seeing their loved ones again and a possible end to the violence, hope is being held in check by the realization of just what a gargantuan task it will be to implement the ceasefire deal.
Let's cross straight over to our correspondent, Emily Gordine in Jerusalem. She's been following this from the beginning. Emily, the implementation of this deal, we still have to wait for several steps to be taken, including getting ratification by the Israeli government. But I understand there's been a snag. Tell us more.
Absolutely. So the Israeli government, the Israeli cabinet, was meant to vote on this deal this morning at 11 o'clock. They were meant to meet and vote on this deal. Now, this meeting has been postponed. Initially, it was postponed to the afternoon. Now it's been postponed indefinitely. And according to the Prime Minister's office, which has issued a statement, the meeting has been postponed because Hamas has been reneging on parts of the deal. It's been going back on parts of the deal. Now, this morning, actually, the Prime Minister's office said that specifically Hamas said that it wants to decide on the identities of the Palestinians released from Israeli prisons as part of this deal. According to the statement, the opposite had been agreed on. This is apparently going against what the two parties had agreed on in this deal. This is something which is very difficult for us to verify at this point. But I think it's also very important to mention here that within the Israeli government itself, there's also a big discussion and very big differences on whether this deal should be agreed upon, should be ratified or not. Specifically, the far right, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and his party this morning have been deliberating on whether they want to stay in this government if this government agrees to this deal. Then you also have National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who's also been very vocal in his opposition to this deal. So there's also pressure within the government, pressure that has been there for months and months and months, really since the beginning of this conflict. And now again, we're seeing signs that it's becoming a problem once again. So right at the start of this deal, we're already seeing pretty big obstacles on the horizon.
So you say that the meeting that was supposed to take place today in the Israeli cabinet to ratify the deal has been postponed indefinitely. What's going to happen next?
Well, that's the big question. Ultimately, we wait. And in the meantime, the fighting continues. We saw overnight that Israel struck Gaza, killing dozens of civilians, dozens of people. And we also saw this morning that a rocket was launched from Gaza into Israeli territory. And that is also, you know, it's causing a lot of concern also for the hostage families in Israel who have really gotten their hopes up now that a deal was on the horizon. Same, we saw the pictures coming out from Gaza, people celebrating after being under heavy bombardment, living under heavy bombardment for months and months and months. So many are still hoping that this deal will go through ultimately.
Emily, thank you very much. That was DW's Emily Gordine there in Jerusalem. Well, as you just heard, there's an impasse now again in negotiations to get the ceasefire deal in place. The Israeli cabinet has postponed a decision on ratifying it. Well, let's take a closer look of what had been agreed, at least in principle. The ceasefire and hostage deal is supposed to be completed in 3 phases. Phase 1 is a 6-week-long ceasefire set to start on Sunday, if we can get it ratified. During this phase, Israeli troops would withdraw from all populated areas of Gaza, and Hamas would release 33 hostages. In return, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Now, phase 2 would see Hamas free more hostages and a full Israeli withdrawal from all of Gaza. Then, what is likely to be the most difficult part would see the start of negotiations to reach a permanent end to the war. Finally, in a 3rd phase, major reconstruction efforts would start in Gaza. Displaced Palestinians would be able to return to their homes anywhere in the territory, and Hamas would release the remains of any remaining hostages who have died. Well, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had welcomed the ceasefire deal as a critical first step, but stressed that much hard work lies ahead.
The humanitarian situation is at catastrophic levels. And I call on all parties to facilitate the rapid, unhindered and safe humanitarian relief for all civilians in need. From our side, we will do whatever is humanly possible, aware of the serious challenges and constraints that we face. But we expect our efforts to be matched by other humanitarian actors, the private sector, and bilateral initiatives.